Builders, backstories, breakthroughs. This is the Journey in Conversation.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Journey in Conversation. I am absolutely privileged to have with me today in our virtual studio, Anita Bruinsma, the owner, founder of Clarity Personal Finance. Anita, good morning. How are you?
I am well, Paul. How are you?
Oh, fantastic. I'm really glad that you could join me today. And, we're recording this in October. The Blue Jays are in the World Series, but folks at home, you're going to see it in the new year. So I think it's a great time to talk about new year, new us, new finance. But before we get into that, Anita, why don't you talk to us a little bit about your backstory? You have this business, Clarity Personal Finance, that you've started, and you're on a bit of a mission to help people with their finances. Tell us your backstory. Where'd you come from? What are you doing now?
Sure. Yeah. So you're right. I am certainly on a mission to help people with their money. And I've been in this business running Clarity for about 4 years now. But before that, I was in banking for many, many years. I went to university and did a business degree. I was hired in my 4th year to work for TD Bank in a bank branch. And so really for 25 years, I was pretty conventional. I was working for the bank. I had a whole bunch of different jobs. I did take a bit of time off to live in the UK. So I was in London for 1.5 years, my early 20s. Probably the most adventurous thing I've done up until the last few years of my life. So I am, I've always loved routine, structure. So working for a bank really suited me very well. And while I was at the bank, I did have many different jobs. That's the nice thing about working for a large corporation like that. It's not just one job. So I had probably 8 or 9 jobs over those 25 years, some which were fantastic, some which were less than fantastic. But, the common thread through all of that was finance, right? So my first job was in a bank branch. And I think that's really where I first got this desire to help people. My job was to sit with people. They came in, they asked their questions. They needed bank accounts, mortgages, investments, credit cards. I saw people with all kinds of different income levels, different knowledge levels. And that's, I think, really where I first got my first taste of kind of like working with people with money. So, moving through the bank and doing all the different things was really fun. But I always kind of had that little nugget right at the beginning of kind of like thinking about, helping people with their money.
Yeah. And, personal finance is such an interesting topic too, right? Like it's not something that we think about a whole lot outside of, some of us, maybe a few times a year, we might look at our portfolio, we might look at a budget or something and try and kind of really get a North Star and get some direction on what we're doing with our money. And, outside of that, like there's not a whole lot of thought about it. And there's definitely not a ton of education in Canada about these topics, about personal finance. And I'm sure that that in your practice, you run across that all the time. Like you run across people who they don't really have that kind of basic background knowledge in finance, in the markets, in personal finance and financial planning. So how do you square that circle? Like, how do you kind of work with those people and bridge that gap between what you know and what they know or they don't know? I'm sure it's a topic for you.
Yeah, I mean, that is something that I learned very, very early on. So even when I was 24 and working in a bank branch, I realized that even then I still kind of had an advantage because I was in the banking world. So I at least was getting some financial literacy. But what I would say really opened my eyes to this was about when I was around 25, 26, I was working in the bank in our media relations department. And I was working with a woman called Patricia Lovett-Reed, who was our bank spokesperson. And she had a show called Money Talk. And this was a personal or financial planning show where we had guests on. And we had this one guest, her name was Lori Campbell. And she was talking about the challenges people have around debt and building their financial life. And what she always talked about was exactly what you're saying, is that people simply didn't have the knowledge and education. And that even giving people even a base level of information and knowledge about personal finance, she had seen in her work with credit counseling what difference that made in people's lives. And I remember that so clearly, looking at her and thinking, yeah, that's so important. And that's what I want to do. And that was really the moment where I was like, okay, this is something I'm going to do at some point in my life. And you mentioned earlier going into the new year and new starts or whatever. And what I will say is that thought sat with me for many, many years. And I woke up on January 1st, 2020, and I said, this is the year when I'm going to pursue that. I'm going to leave my job. I'm going to start my own business. And then we know what happened after that. We had COVID, we had the work from home, all the chaos. So that was postponed a little bit. But, that is the nice thing about January 1st is you can wake up and say, this year, this is what I'm going to pursue. And this is the goal that I'm going to have. And so starting Clarity, it was exactly with that thought in mind. Because the other thing that I had noticed when I was talking with my friends is how they were, not only did they have very little knowledge, but they were scared of it. And in particular, I will say, I was talking with a couple of women who were quite frankly unhappy in their marriages, but were really scared about the idea of doing anything about it because they didn't understand their finances. They didn't know whether they were going to be okay. They didn't know where to start. They were overwhelmed. And that was another signal to me that like, hey, like we're in midlife now. This is happening. People are separating, divorcing, and the issue is coming to the forefront hard for a lot of people. And so that was my other moment where I was like, really realizing this lack of knowledge and the impact it can have on people's lives. Not only are you missing out on building a strong financial life, but you can actually end up being stuck somewhere where you really don't want to be. And whether that's stuck in a relationship you don't want to be in, stuck in a job you don't want to be in, without having an understanding you have options or what to do about it. That to me was really a motivating factor to be like, hey, I can help people. I can help them get out of those situations.
Yeah, and that's a great point to kind of bring up. Like, if you're in a situation where you don't necessarily have the resources just kind of like banked away, it can be you can be very trapped. So this kind of concept where a big part of your motivation is helping people plan for kind of the unforeseen. You don't want to get into this being like, oh, I'm going to help everybody who's going through a divorce, get through that. But really, it's kind of about the unknown, about what can you do to help people plan for the unknown and get through those major life events, whether they're expected or unexpected or whatnot. Like that seems to be kind of a big motivating factor for you. But was there anything else beyond kind of that was really a motivation? Like you mentioned, you worked on Bay Street for a long time, worked for a big bank for a long time. That's a bit of a shift going from that environment to owning your own business. Like, what was there something beyond that made you say, like, I'm going to start my own business? Like, talk to us a little bit about that. Like, what were the things that kind of came together and made it the perfect time for Anita to start her own business? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there were several things that were leading up to this. So as I said, I was enjoying the bank, the corporate world. I like routine. I like all of that. But somewhere around age 45, I started wondering whether I could have a different sort of lifestyle. So I met my partner, Kurt, who was self-employed, and I saw that some mornings he was maybe a bit tired. So he just didn't start work till noon. And I was like, wait, you can do that? Like, this is possible? And it was a total shock to me because for 25 years, I'd rushed out the door to get down to the office and feeling super stressed and dropping the kids off at daycare and like all the craziness. And I didn't even think about the fact that maybe actually there's another way to live, another way that I can do this. And so that was a big motivator for me. The other thing was that I had an office. I sat in a cubicle most of my career on the 33rd floor of the bank tower that overlooks the water. And I would sit in my office in the middle of July, freezing because the temperature was too low, drinking my tea and looking out the window at the sailboats on the lake. And I was like, why am I here in the cold in July? Why can't I have the flexibility to just spend an hour walking through the park or take the morning off or do it? And I realized I was kind of missing out on like this summer time experience. And that was another motivator for me, is like there was so little flexibility in that world to just take those breaks and to kind of enjoy life in that way. So that was the other thing. And then the last thing was just, I had teenagers. I had like, my kids were something like, 13 and 15. And I realized that being around, being home at that age, like you think they don't need you when they're teenagers, but I think the opposite is true. They still need you a lot. They need you to be there, to show that you're around, to give them advice. So all those things came together at around age 45. And I sort of went, I think maybe there's something else I want to do. And then combined with the fact that I had a passion that could be a job, right? So the perfect combination of things is like you have a passion, you love it, it's something you can actually do that will actually help people, and you can make money at it, and you can have the flexibility. Like I was sort of lucky that I had all of those things. You know, not many people necessarily have that perfect sort of combination of skills and history and desires to make that happen. And I feel really fortunate that I did have that, and I was able to kind of merge all those things together.
Yeah, and you know, the whole work-life balance, if you want to call that, I kind of think of it more as, you know, personal freedom, having a little bit more agency in your day when you're a business owner and you work for yourself is pretty appealing. And you know, for the folks who kind of work in the office towers downtown Toronto or any other city, you know, we had that kind of brief flirtation with it during COVID, where folks could work from home. They had a heck of a lot more agency, and a lot of people really liked that, and they really kind of enjoyed having a bit more control over their day. And certainly there are a lot of people who enjoyed having less of a commute to get to where they were working or get home. So, you know, for folks who are thinking about starting their own business, like maybe if you want more of that, you can have more of that. Just you kind of would.
Let's be clear though, there are certainly downsides to that. Like there is no question that I loved having a paycheck land in my account every 2 weeks. I had benefits, I was in a pension plan, there was a stock purchase plan, like all of that stuff you get working for a large corporation. For sure, I miss that. Like there was a lot of that was really important to me, because for me, money for me represents stability and safety. That's my money personality. And so for me to have the stable paycheck and the benefits and all of that, it made me feel really good. And so cutting those ties and having that first month where it was like, oh, there's no paycheck landing in my bank account, like that, you can't sort of overlook how dramatic that change is and how insecure that can make you feel. And so I just want to remind people of that. And the other thing too is around routine. And so when you are here in your home office, and there's laundry to do, and there's grocery shopping, and there's the people coming to fix your whatever, like there's a lot of distractions. And so it is also very hard, and I find it very stressful sometimes to make sure that I feel like I'm being productive and that I've set aside the hours, I'm not being interrupted, I'm not getting distracted, no, my kid needs a ride to work with, or like all of that stuff. It's so easy to get to the end of the day and go, what did I do today? Like, was I productive enough? Did I get enough work done? And so that's the other thing that's a lot of discipline is required, and a lot of thinking about like, how many hours a day do I want to work, and how concentrated are those hours going to be? And when am I going to close my door and say, you know, don't bother me until lunchtime?
Yeah. And you know, that's something that I'm still figuring out. Like I'm just about a year now into kind of my own journey with my own business. And I personally have a bit of a thing where the end of the day kind of rolls around, and you know, there's that very foggy line between 5 and 5:30 and 6 and sometimes 7, where you're still doing something, or you don't really feel like you kind of accomplish anything of note. And then you kind of tack onto that you're sitting in your home. Mm-hmm. You're not sitting in an office. You know, one of the things that I kind of miss about going to an office is there was a very clear demarcation between this is work and this is home. And that demarcation, you had that kind of transition period, the commute, where you leave the office and you go home, and you're at home, and you can kind of leave the office at the office and have home at home. I still kind of struggle a little bit with that. Do you have any, you know, you're 5 years in, do you have any tips, any advice on how to make that process a little bit easier? Like, does it get easier, or do you just have to kind of get used to it?
For me, it has not gotten easier. I'm going to be honest, like I still struggle with it all these years later. Because remembering part of the reason why I left the corporate world was for that flexibility. And so I do love it. And if it's a sunny, warm October day, like we've had in October, I'm not going to look out the window and say, why am I stuck in here? I'm going to go for a walk in the park, or I'm going to go for a run or whatever. Right. And so I still do struggle with that. I think what I'm working towards is what we would call like focused work time. And so if you think about anyone who works in an office or any other environment, right? You go to work, you're there at 8:30 or 9 o'clock, you're there until 5 o'clock. Even when you're working in an office, how many hours a day are you actually productive? Right? So you think about the time you spend surfing the internet, going to get coffee, having lunch, talking with someone in the hallway, going to the drugstore to pick up your prescription, like whatever, all these other things. I look back and I think of those 8.5 hours or 8 hours you spent in the office, how many of them were you actually doing focus work? And I think, if we think about that struggle, applying it to the home life, it's actually not that different, right? And so I think I'm working towards this idea of like focus time. And so if we're supposed to have an 8-hour workday, the reality is that most people can't be super focused for 8 hours, right? Most people cannot. There are exceptions, but most of us kind of do, maybe it's 3 or 4 hours of super focused, hard work time. And then we're tired, our brains hurt, our creativity lags, our focus lags, or whatever. So I'm really trying to think about, what does my work week look like? Which days do I want to have that focus work? How many hours is it? And so then if I can say, well, I'm going to spend 3 hours on Tuesdays afternoons and 5 hours on Thursdays and 5 on Fridays, and those are the hours when I'm going to do nothing else but focus work, maybe that's what's going to work for me. And then the hours, I'm still working, but I'm more like popping in and out and working in shorter spurts. And so I think that's what I'm trying to work towards. And I don't know if you've ever had that experience of trying to have those focus hours and if that's worked for you.
Yeah, I very much, I'm one of those people who kind of looks at my calendar and treats it like a manufacturing production plan. I kind of look at the day, I look at the week, and 2 hours here, 2 hours here, 2 hours here. And I really try to kind of block off that time in a very intentional way. But, the thing that I find is a little bit challenging is like, this is your home as well as your office. So even if you say, all right, I'm going to do X for 2 hours, you can kind of sit down and start getting into it and get through it. And then all of a sudden you hear a dog barking in the hallway. And in my building, there's tons of dogs, and they're all really, really cute. And I like dogs, so you can see how that kind of spirals together and, well, leads to distraction. Let's put it that way. But I'm very intentional about my day and my calendar and everything. But it even, despite our best efforts, like sometimes things just, they get away from us. And that's something that you do have to, I think, for the folks who are thinking about starting a business, you do have to be very cognizant of that you're going to have to come up with strategies to keep yourself focused and productive. And for me, sometimes it's really just about like ducking out, grabbing the laptop, going down the street, going to a coffee shop just for a change of pace for an hour or two, getting some light work done. I find that helps a lot, but you've really got to kind of come up with your own strategies and find your own path when it comes to all of that stuff. One thing I did want to ask you about was, you said that you kind of embarked upon this journey almost 6 years ago now. So right, 2020, you're starting a business, COVID happens. What was that like? What were the early kind of days like for you, just taking this leap? Like, was it messy? I'm sure there was a lot of uncertainty. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So I did actually delay leaving my job. So I didn't leave till about middle of 2021, like August, September 2021. So I did delay it, partly because, I was working from home. So that, as you say, people kind of got used to working from home. So that was great. But yeah, starting the business was, how do I put it exactly? I sort of just jumped into it. And so when I thought about what kind of business I wanted to start, the business to me was, I want to help people with their money. That was my business plan. I want to help people with their money. I'd worked with friends and family on a casual basis. I knew what that felt like. I knew what results people had seen from working with me. And so I just jumped in. I found my first client through a friend. That friend told a friend. I advertised a little bit on my Facebook group, and slowly the clients came in. And I just kind of started doing it and feeling my way through it. So it was intentional in that what I knew what I wanted to do was help people with their money, but I didn't necessarily have, a niche or how many clients. And, I had like a pricing plan, but I didn't really know how to price it. So it was a lot of feeling my way through is really the best way for me to describe it. And what I discovered maybe 6 months in or so was that the business I had decided to create actually had a name. So what I actually was an advice only financial planner. There's actually a whole community of us in Canada, and advice only financial planners are people who don't work for a big financial institution. They don't sell products. They don't manage money. They're just giving unbiased, independent financial advice for a flat fee. And I was like, oh, so my business has a name. It's called Advice Only Financial Planning. And that's when I discovered the community, and when I started connecting with other advice only planners and hearing about them, like how they run their business. And so I learned a lot by spending half an hour with different financial planners across the country and asking them those questions, like, how did you start the business? How are you pricing? How do you work with clients? How do you manage the client flow? All these kind of questions. And so, yeah, I would say it was certainly messy initially. There were a lot of growing pains in terms of trying to figure out client flow and how many clients can you take on at once, and how do you keep on top of your email, because I think that's a very common problem, is like staying on top of emails, not letting them fall through the cracks, responding to people and all that kind of stuff. And so with time, though, I the pieces started to fall into place. I would talk to one financial planner and she'd say, oh, this is what I do. And I'd be like, oh, I love that. I'm going to adopt that. Another one would say, this is how I manage this. And I'd say, oh yeah, I'm going to do that. And so I took these pieces from these different advice only planners that I've met from across the country and incorporated that into my business. And am I there yet? Well, no, I'm still not completely there yet. Like, I'm still changing things and adding things and experimenting with different things to make the business more efficient, to make it less stressful, to make it better for my clients, like all of these things. So it's like, it's an incredible, I know people say, oh, it's a journey, but like, it is a journey. It sounds kind of cliche, but it totally is, because I'm constantly learning these new things. When you work for a business, you get a new job, you show up at a corporation, they have the routines, they have the way they do things, you get the employee manual, everything's laid out for you. That's not the case when you're starting your own business. And so it really has been feeling my way through, very piecemeal, building it bit by bit.
Yeah, and just to touch on something that kind of stuck out to me is really interesting. So you said that you started this business, you kind of dived in, two hands, head everything, didn't really think about it. I want to help people with my money, with their money. That's the business plan. But you also said that you didn't have a niche. And what's really interesting to me as a consumer, like someone who buys financial planning services, there actually is, from my perspective anyway, quite an interesting niche in being an advice-only financial planner, because the overwhelming majority of financial planners that I've talked to over the years, decades, whatever, that I've been kind of soliciting financial advice from different people, is the overwhelming majority, like they work for a bank, or they work for some organization, some business that is engaged in selling financial products. There are very few people, as kind of a percentage of the whole, that don't do that don't have any of that baked in bias, that just take a fee, whether it's flat or hourly or whatever else, that just say, okay, pay me for my time. I'm going to give you unbiased advice. That is a niche, and it's a really cool one for people who understand the biases that financial planners can have when they're selling those products too. So talk to us a little bit about that, because I find it fascinating. Like, why did you elect to, I kind of think I know the answer, but why did you elect to do advice only financial planning versus doing financial planning that also involves product sales? Because let's be honest, you probably could make a heck of a lot more money selling products as a part of your practice. So why take that intentional pathway?
Well, you're right to say that most financial planners do work for an organization. That could be a bank, it could be an insurance company, it could be a mutual fund company, it could be like Edward Jones type folks. And so, yeah, why didn't I take that route? Well, there are a couple of reasons. So aside from the fact that I don't, I wanted the flexibility and work for myself and all of that, it's true that a financial planner who sells products and sells investment products and manages your money for you, there are inherent biases in that model. So there's a couple things. One is that when you're selling a product, it could, and I say could, okay, it could skew the type of advice you're going to get. So let's give an example where someone's like, I have a mortgage, it's a really big mortgage, and I'm not sure if I should be paying down my mortgage or if I should be investing. And so you think of a financial planner who invests your money for you, they might say, well, I don't think you should pay down your mortgage. You should definitely just be growing your investments. And possibly they might be right. Possibly it could be that they want your investments to grow because that's how they make money, is by charging you a fee on the amount of money you have managed. Now, in a lot of cases, that is the right advice anyway. That's the advice I would give, unless mortgage rates are really high. So that's just kind of one example of how those biases can play in. But also, I think if you're managing someone's finances, sometimes the financial planning part of it doesn't really take the priority that it should. And I'm being really careful with my words here because every financial planner is unique. Every financial planner is different. There's also different types of financial planners. And so I don't want to paint everyone with the same brush. And that is not what I mean to do. There are excellent financial planners who also manage money. Okay, so that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that there can be this push and pull factor for people. And then also, if you're working for one of the big corporations, like the banks, for example, there's things like targets and sales goals and client goals and AUM goals and all these things. And what I find is clients of mine who work for some of these bank financial planners, but also say financial advisors, which is a little bit of a different thing, they tend to not get maybe the amount of service and personal attention that they could be getting, because these planners and advisors, they have a lot of clients, right? They need to have this big book of business. That's what their employer is pushing them towards. And so they might not get that personalized advice and service that you can get with an advice-only planner. So those are some of the reasons why being independent is very beneficial. And, the idea of being paid, you paying someone and being super clear about what you're paying. And so if you're working with a financial planner who's managing money, it can be a bit murky. So you might be paying them sort of a percentage of the money that you're investing with them, but then there's things like trailer fees on the mutual funds, and those aren't always super visible, and clients don't always know actually what they're paying for everything. And with an advice-only planner, it's like, here's my invoice. This is what you're going to pay me. This is what you're going to get. And there's no kind of hidden fees and wondering about whatever. It's like, it's super, super clear, very, very transparent. And then you as the client can decide whether you think you're getting value for your money, whether this is worth it for you, rather than sort of, guessing. Because also when you work with one of those big planners, it can feel like you're getting a free financial plan sometimes. Again, depending on what kind of planner you go to, sometimes you get a free financial plan. But of course, it's not free because you're paying those fees for them to manage your investments. So it's, I think, that murkiness, which is also confusing to people.
Yeah, and that kind of lesson really was really driven home for me at one point in my life. I kind of looked at one financial planner that I was working with. This is probably about 10 years ago now, 15 years maybe. And they were charging a percentage of the assets under management based on the number of trades that they were doing. And there were some other factors. And I thought to myself, oh, okay, that's fine. They're charging 1.5%. Like, that's a small number, 1.5. Like, who cares? Not really a big deal. But then I later kind of got into this world of like, let's talk to someone who is a professional who will charge a flat fee. And this is also, over a decade ago now, where I kind of looked at this and said, all right, so I'm going to talk to this person who charges a flat fee, and I'm going to talk to this other person who charges a flat fee. And what is that flat fee? And the number made me hesitate at first. I was like, oh, geez, this is going to be $2,000. This is going to be $2,500. This is going to be $3,000. And that really made me kind of stop dead in my tracks until I looked at the fees that were actually coming out of that 1.5%. And when I looked at that and I said, oh, wow, that 1.5% is 3 times what the advice only financial planning would be. So why am I doing this not the way that this person who is wanting to charge me a flat fee of $2,000? Why am I not doing that? It's buried. You don't really think so much about the money, the fees that are coming out, because they just kind of, when they come out of your account, you don't really see them. It's no big deal. But that money adds up, like the opportunity cost of that money that you could otherwise be investing or putting into something, or even using for a vacation, if you really wanted to. Like it's real money, even if it's buried. So that lesson, like it kind of came home to me at that point when I did the math. Do you find in your practice that there are other people who are kind of like that? They say, oh, this is actually less expensive. Why haven't I been doing this all along? Is that like a conversation you have every single day? And and that's what it is?
Yeah, I do have people saying that. And, I don't know whether they have that sticker shock right up front. I think what's happening is, I tell them the price, and also I put my price on my website so people know before they even talk to me. I'm like, did you look at my website to see what the fee is? So it's completely transparent, right? So basically by the time they get to me, they already know how much I'm going to charge. And so they've already had that thought process in their head. But I've certainly had a lot of clients after the fact go, yeah, that was real value for my money. And then doing the math that you mentioned of like 1.5% or 1.2% on my assets, like that's going to be a lot. So yeah, I think that's something people think about all the time. But I think also the other unique thing about advice only planners is that you can be a do-it-yourself investor and still get a financial plan. And so for these financial planners who are managing your money, there are a lot of people who don't want someone managing their money for them, right? They want to manage their own investments. And so then who you go to get that financial planning or even investment advice, right? You can't go to one of these financial planners unless you also give them all of your money to manage. And so that's the other really cool thing about advice only planning is you can be a do-it-yourself investor. So it's like, I'm going to look after managing my own money. I just need someone to give me, a savings plan, a cash flow plan, a retirement plan. Which account should I be using? Should I put money in my RSP, my TFSA? How much do I need in my RESP? Like all these questions that people find really confusing. So we write that plan and then they're like, okay, and we're also going to talk about what should your asset allocation be in your investments and what kind of investments might you hold? And then as a do-it-yourself investor, you're like, okay, I have this investment plan and now I can execute it. And so that's the other really cool thing about it being an advice only planner. And it's also kind of a service that's kind of unique to what I offer. So I also offer what I call investment coaching. And it's sort of a term I made up. Honestly, I'm not sure there are any other investment coaches around really, but I also have a really strong history with investing. So I spent 15 years managing mutual funds with the bank. And so I was like a stock picker. I was in the markets and I love investing. And so now I offer people a lot of education around investing, how to be a do-it-yourself investor, how to get started, how to choose a broker, all this kind of stuff that really there's very little sort of personalized advice for do-it-yourself investors. And so that's my other sort of part of my business, which I absolutely love. I'm super passionate about it. Is just sometimes some clients, they only need an hour with me. It's like, let's spend an hour. I'm going to look at how you're investing. We're going to have a conversation about it. And they walk away and go, okay, now I know that like I'm basically doing fine. Someone's looked at it. I have a bit more information and that's kind of all they need. So yeah, that's the other kind of cool thing about not being tied to having to manage someone's investments.
Yeah, and it's funny for someone who has said like I started my business without a niche in mind. We've now talked about 2 niches.
And that's true. And that's how things evolve, right? Sort of over time, you kind of start to realize what areas you love the most and where you feel the most passionate about. And you do kind of migrate in that direction.
Yeah. And I, as someone again who has spent quite a bit of time with financial planners, looking for my financial planners over the years, I can absolutely say that it is a very, very small niche of financial planners who are going to say, yeah, you want to be a DIY investor, you want to manage your own investments, that's cool. I will give you advice. Let's look at your plan together. Let's look at your allocations. That is rare. That is super, super rare. And, full disclosure for the folks at home, I work with Anita. We talk once, maybe twice a year, about my portfolio, and I kind of engage in that activity. I say, this is what I'm thinking of doing. Anita, you worked on Bay Street. You are a financial planner. You are outside of my brain. What do you think? And it's fantastic. So if you're a DIY investor looking for that kind of value that a financial planner who's really, really interested in the markets and knows what they're talking about can bring, like, if you look for those people, there's not a lot of them around. I think I found 3 when I was looking 2-3 years ago. So, the power of niching. Do you find that niche drives much more of your business, your practice these days versus 5 years ago? Like, are there people who are looking for that looking for what you're selling? Like, is it a big part of your business, or kind of just a little specialized piece that's nice when it comes along?
It's about half of my business. So half of my business is traditional financial planning. Half of it is investment coaching. And yes, I'm definitely seeing more and more interest over the year. So you can see the statistics of the number of people who are at least experimenting with do-it-yourself investing. People are like dipping their toes in the water. I get a lot of people coming to me who say, look, like, I'm working with a financial advisor, but I'm not getting the service I like. I'm paying too much in fees. I'm kind of annoyed, but I'm afraid to make the leap. I'm afraid to leave my financial advisor. So I get a lot of people like that. And then when we spend a few hours together and I explain, what it means to get an online brokerage account, what are exchange traded funds, how do you set up your asset allocation, all these kinds of things. Usually after about 3 hours of this kind of one-on-one coaching, they walk away and go, oh, this is actually not that hard, and I can totally do it myself. So that's a growing part of my business for sure. But then what I also think is super interesting is the young people. So the people in their 20s who don't even think about going to a bank or financial advisor. Their first thought is like, I'm just going to go straight to Wealthsimple, Questrade, Q-Trade, one of these online brokerages. And I'm like, why would I even bother with these people? Because these are the kids, what are young people who grew up in the online culture, of course. And so they're super comfortable with everything online. And it's like, they're not super worried about the technology or the safety or security. They kind of have a lot of trust, and they kind of figure, there's lots of information on YouTube and whatever, Snapchat, I don't even know where they're looking, all the social media, there's tons of information online. So they know they can get the education. Then they come to me and say, hey, look, I've read and watched all these videos. Like, tell me what the truth is. Like, how do I actually do this? And again, within a few hours, we've kind of eliminated all the super high risk stuff they should stay away from. Here's how you could do it with exchange traded funds, keep it really simple, and they're off and running. And if you think about, Paul, starting at 25 with a TFSA, with a DIY portfolio of ETFs, like, the power of that over 20, 30, 40 years is really incredible. And to me, that is one of the most exciting parts of my business, is working with those people.
Yeah, I was going to say that must be just incredibly fulfilling, having that couple hours with someone who they have a little bit of an idea of what they want to do, and they talk to you, you kind of go through your process, you educate them a little bit. I would assume that confidence building is also a part of that process, like having a little bit of confidence kind of develop from understanding, personal finance and understanding how all this works, and having more control. That must be super, super validating. And it's very interesting to me that that you're speaking to a bunch of folks who are in their 20s, who are younger, who didn't even think about going to a big bank, or didn't even think about going to, not to pick on Edward Jones, there are people there who do love fantastic work, they're great, but didn't even think about going to a brokerage like that for, their investing and their saving for the future. They're just like, yep, I can go buy something in the market directly. It'll cost me $5 a trade, or now there are a ton of ETFs that are commission free, so I can just do this myself. How did you have a particular strategy for finding those folks, or did they find you? Like, how do you manage that kind of outreach? Because that also seems to me to be a very powerful kind of niche in like your customer acquisition. Like, there's 20 somethings who don't want to do the bank or brokerage thing, they just want advice. Like, was that an intentional thing, or just kind of like happen upon you?
It sort of happened to me. And I think where people were finding me is these people in their 20s who, they finished their schooling, they've got their first job, they realize now, like, I've got a real paycheck, and they're like, I don't want to screw it up. And so they start searching. So they start Googling, like, who can help me? Who can help me? And then over time, they end up finding me somehow. Sometimes that's just from Google search. Sometimes it's maybe on a Reddit thread. A lot of the times it's like their parents worked with me, or it's a referral from another person, like a lot of referrals, right? So it's like, oh, I know this person, and then they send them along to me. So there's a lot of that. And I think that's probably primarily the way that people are finding me. But then it becomes like a ball rolling down a hill, right? Where it's like you gain momentum, and then this person tells this person, this tells this person. And that is really how I get, I don't know, maybe half of my clients now are sort of like, oh, I worked with someone, I worked with Anita, you should go talk to her or whatever. So that's been important. And I don't think I knew when I started this business that was exactly a thing, but I'm certainly seeing it now. And we know that during COVID, a lot of young people were experimenting with trading online. And I certainly have clients who came to me and said, wow, like, I lost a lot of money on the meme stocks, the crypto, the GameStop. And they come to me and they go, okay, well, I tried, but I think I actually need to start over again and actually learn how to do it properly.
Yeah, I was, as you were talking there, I was thinking to myself, oh, meme stocks. I wonder what Anita says when somebody comes to her and it basically says, I would like to take GameStop to the moon.
I think when people look at my website and they come to me, they're like, I probably shouldn't say that to Anita. I'm guessing that she's not going to like to hear that. And I have clients who, they know that I think, like, you should really not buy individual stocks. You should stick with plain, boring index ETFs. Make sure you have the right asset allocation. Like, that's what I preach continuously. And so when people come to me and they say, I think I know what you're going to say, but what about, and I kind of I give them the whole spiel about diversification and risk management and how actively picking stocks is really hard. And I remind them of all that philosophy, and they go, yeah, that's what I thought. I just wanted to check in. So it's always a fun conversation.
Yeah, I have no doubt. Let's change gears a little bit. So I'm a big believer in the idea that you will learn the most from failure. You're not going to really learn a whole lot from success, from like the wins you put on the board. You're going to learn the most from the losses or setbacks that you put up on the board. Can you talk to the folks at home a little bit about something that stands out for you, where you gave it the old college try? You really tried hard. You thought something was the right thing to do. It was going to work out great, but it completely flopped. What was that, and what did you learn from it, more importantly?
I would say there are probably two areas in which I've made mistakes or things have been really difficult. And so the one thing I've learned kind of early on is picking the right work for you. And so there had been times early on when I was just getting going, and I took on some clients that probably weren't the right fit for me. Maybe they were looking for information that wasn't quite within my wheelhouse. Maybe their situation, I couldn't actually really help them, but I wanted to help them because that's my mantra. I want to help people with their money. And so I took on these clients partly because I wanted to help them, partly because I was just getting up and running. So I want to get new clients. And there were certainly times when I was sort of partway through this financial plan or working with them with some coaching, and I just realized, like, this is not a good fit. And sometimes it was, I don't know how to make a plan for this person. Like, they're in a situation that I just feel like I don't even know exactly what to give them. Or sometimes it's a niche of their life that I just don't have experience with. So, for example, it's like people who have big corporations, like that is not my area of expertise. So now I know if someone has a corporation, unless it's small, I'm going to refer you on to someone else. But when you're in the middle of a client who you sort of feel is not the right fit for you, it can feel really bad. It feels super stressful. You don't know really how to deal with it. It's a bit of an ego thing, right? It's a little bit like, I don't want to admit that I don't know what to do here or how to help you. And it weighs on you and it overshadows all the other work that you're doing, right? It preoccupies your mind and it erodes your confidence, right? So you start thinking, maybe this isn't the right business for me. You get imposter syndrome. You start thinking, maybe I shouldn't even, like, what am I even doing here? Who am I to be helping people with their money? And you start questioning all of your skills and abilities and experience. And that is so demoralizing. And so that is something that I really struggled with, I'd say, in the first couple of years, is making sure that I'm not taking on something that I can't do well. And then how to break up that relationship and how to have the courage to say to them, look, I'm sorry, I'm actually not the person to help you. Let me try to find another advice-only planner who is better suited to you. And so now I've learned that when I'm talking to someone with my introductory call, we have like a 15, 20-minute conversation. And I at the end of the conversation, I'm like, this client, I just don't feel they're right for me. I will give them one or two other names that they can be referred off to, because it makes you feel bad. It's super stressful, and it just takes up too much of your time. So just being really selective and making sure that the people you're working with or the kind of work you're doing is actually something you're going to do well.
Yeah. So I guess you have to, it almost sounds like you need to kind of come up with a bit of a breakup plan before doing the breakup. And I find it so interesting because I've been through a very similar loop, in my own business, where you're starting out, you're new, you're fresh, you want clients, you need to get yourself established. So you kind of start snowballing and building those relationships, but not all relationships in a professional sense, should carry on. There are some relationships that are absolutely not great working relationships, and they'll suck up time and energy and everything, like you're saying. But when you're first starting out, like you're very, very eager to take them on anyway, because there isn't anything else really in the pipe. And one thing that I've kind of noticed is that if a working relationship with a client just isn't right, and you're kind of starting to sense that it isn't right. One thing that I struggled with early on was thinking that it was my fault, that it was like my problem, that it was some deficiency that I had, that I couldn't work with this client. And then it kind of became, oh, well, no, it must be their fault. And then I kind of had this kind of thought process where I said to myself, wait a second, just because a working relationship with a client doesn't gel, doesn't jive, it doesn't mean that it's anybody's fault. It could be that the relationship just doesn't work because the combination of me and them, how I work, how they work, what my expectations are, what their expectations are, they just don't mesh up. So it's not really anybody's fault. It's just not properly aligned. It took me a while to kind of get there. And I think that all people who are engaged in professional services, like, eventually you'll come to that realization that there are some relationships that they just shouldn't be. And that's fine. It's not, a you problem or a them problem. It's just, this is kind of what it is. It's okay. You can ditch a client, they can ditch you, move on with your day. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you or with them. It is. It's que sera.
I would totally agree with that. And then it's also getting used to having some difficult conversations. And I'm not traditionally good at difficult conversations. And so it's something I've had to step up and kind of be more honest with people, either right up front or halfway through a relationship. And that can be really uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Yeah, and so I'm also not great at having difficult conversations. Like I tend to shy away from them a little bit. Like it's not my bag. From someone who doesn't like having difficult conversations, who has had them, do you have any advice for people who are like us, who don't like those difficult conversations? How does it get easier? Is there something that they can do to make it easier? Like, is there a mindset thing? Is there a trick? How do you approach those really difficult conversations?
So I do think that a lot of it is mindset. And I think I've had to learn to adopt. It's a little bit what you were talking about, that it's not my fault, it's not their fault, but mostly it's not my fault. And so I have to be able to tell myself that, this didn't work out. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It doesn't mean I'm incompetent. It just is as it is, as you say. And then also while you're having that conversation with the person, you do have to be able to separate yourself a little bit and kind of say, it doesn't really matter what they think of me. I mean, of course it does matter because it's your reputation and it's your ego and your pride and all of that. So it does matter, but you have to be able to say, if they don't like me and if they don't like what I'm saying to them, it's okay. Like, I'm still okay. And that is something that's probably taken me, 50 and a half years to figure out. And so I think that's a really big part of it, is like how you are mentally approaching it from your own self-esteem perspective. And once you're able to say, it doesn't matter what they think of me, then that conversation becomes a lot easier. And you also have to say, well, if this person's an adult, like they're an adult, if they don't like what I'm saying, well, they can handle it. Like they can, they're not going to, implode or hate me or whatever. They're an adult. They can figure it out. They understand difficult conversations. I'm sure they've been in a difficult position themselves, and they can have some empathy for me. And so that's been a little bit helpful. And then also just the feeling of getting it off your chest and understanding that when it's weighing on you constantly, remembering that as soon as you have that difficult conversation, you're probably going to feel a lot better. And so like looking forward to post-conversation and realizing, okay, now I can move on to something else.
Yeah. And, as you say that, it kind of occurs to me like, all right, if you have that difficult conversation, a weight is going to be lifted off your chest, off your shoulders. You're going to feel better. It also is very possible that when you have that difficult conversation, your client is going to feel better, because it absolutely could be that they're feeling the same sort of thing, maybe experience it a little bit differently, but they could be just as uncomfortable as you are. So you might be doing everybody a favor by having that difficult conversation. And it's kind of entertaining to me. Here we are, kind of the number of years that we've had behind us, in front of us, whatever. Both of our generations historically haven't been super great about being in touch with our feelings. And yet here we are talking about our feelings and the impact that kind of our emotional state and how we feel about everything can have on business and life and everything. And I've always admired about this about people who are in their 20s. They are much, much more comfortable accepting how they feel, and more, I think, even more impressively, talking about it. The number of conversations that I've had with family who are in their 20s, and they're just kind of embarking on this journey of like, hey, I'm going to be a real grown up, and I'm going to have this career and this job and do all this thing. And today I kind of feel like crap. And this is why. And they just talk about it. And I'm like, wait, you're talking about this? Like, to me, your family, sure, but we see each other 4 times a year. You're comfortable talking about this with me? Good for you. It's really impressive.
It is, because, well, first of all, I think part of that is that this is a generation that's growing up with therapy, right? And so therapy is awesome. Like having someone to talk to, even if it's like just like a few times, like being open about therapy, I think that's part of that generation, and they understand that that's totally okay. Plus mental health has been a whole conversation that, we didn't have when we were kids, especially, during COVID. That's been a whole thing. So I think that's been really helpful. There's something else I was going to say on that. I can't remember, but yes, no, I think it's very important. Oh, what else I was going to say is that, keeping those, not talking about that stuff, that's what causes anxiety. So I've had my whole life struggling with anxiety throughout different parts of my career. And most of it was because, looking back, most of it because I was at work, I was trying to cover up my fears or insecurities or impostor syndrome or whatever. And always trying to cover that up causes so much anxiety. It's like this dissonance in your brain. And so I think the kids are recognizing that now, that if I just bottle it all up and don't actually talk about it, I'm just going to feel terrible. And I think it's amazing that we're able to move in that direction.
Yeah. And imposter syndrome is something that I find particularly interesting. I'm in my mid 40s now, and I still have imposter syndrome all the time. I think to myself, I might be talking, well, a great example of this is one of my clients in the UK is trying to figure out their distribution strategy for the European Union, the UK, and then how to how to rationalize all of this trade war stuff with the US, and how to take their supply chain and still make financial sense. And I'm sitting here talking to these folks who are headquartered just outside of London, and I'm giving them advice on things that are like, they're grown-up things. They're things that are like, hey, put 100,000 pounds into this particular thing at this particular time. This is the benefit. And I kind of walk them through all those things. And then immediately after, think to myself, there have to be 100 people who can give this advice and talk about this. Like, what makes me different? Why am I talking to this about them? Like, what this is weird. Like, I'm not a grown up. These people are grown ups. Why am I telling them stuff with their grown up business? It's incredibly strange. And it's something that I've had to kind of fight with mentally for quite some time, because I don't really a lot of the time think of myself as like this professional, this like grown up in the room who knows all these things. But all of the objective evidence, I'm happy to say, that comes my way suggests that, yeah, I am grown up in the room and I do know what I'm talking about. So you have to like battle that emotional little inner voice that says, are you really the grown up in the room? When you absolutely are the grown up in the room. Do you have any particular advice or suggestions for folks who are battling that you've kind of learned yourself about imposter syndrome? Like, is there anything that really kind of hits you in the head and you're like, oh yeah, okay, I am the grown up in the room? Like, how has that kind of unfolded for you?
That is a very, very tough one. And so I've suffered from imposter syndrome for a lot of my career as well, especially when I worked in investment management. I started in that job with kind of green, really. And I got hired kind of through knowing people. And so I felt like I was launched into this job, and I probably had imposter syndrome for the first, 10 years of that job. And then, launching your own business, again, like you feel that as well. And I think it's very challenging to get over that. I think one thing that people undersell themselves on is probably the fact that life experience counts for a lot. And so, yes, other people might have the same book knowledge as you do. They've taken the CFP exam, or they've taken the courses that you've taken for your business. Sure, everyone can have that knowledge. But what life experience do you have? And I'm not talking just job experience, and it is obviously job experience and work experience. But when you get to be in your 40s and 50s, you also have a lot of life experience, and you can apply those lessons to different things within your business. And I think people undersell the value of that life experience. And I would also just remind you and everybody that when we think about ourselves, we focus so heavily on the negatives. And so we can have 19 positive comments from clients and one even slightly negative comment, and that comment will wipe out the prior 19. And they say that about relationships and marriages. It takes, I don't know what the number is, it takes like 19 positive comments to offset one negative or something like that. That's human nature. And so trying to get that in perspective, and that one little experience that you might have had where someone said something or had a look on their face, because for me, it's even a look on someone's face. If I'm talking to someone and they have a look on their face, I'm like, ooh, maybe they, think I don't know what I'm talking about or something. And so just being aware that you're doing that is really going to help you with that feeling of that you're not doing a good job. Now, imposter syndrome is very, very tricky one to get over. And I think it's also just reminding yourself that of all the people in my business, I probably know just about as much as they do. And I for sure know more than my client does. And just reminding yourself of that continuously is probably going to help you somewhat.
Yeah. And, I can imagine that if you're engaged in, and this has got to be, doubly so for people who are on trading desks on Bay Street or Wall Street or whatever, like any of the kind of big financial districts and the big financial centers around the world. If you're some 25-year-old kid and all of a sudden you're handed this portfolio and you're told, okay, go and make some money, and you've got $50 million, or you've got $100 million, or $250 million to go and make more money. If you're 25 years old, that's got to be a crazy feeling, unless you're completely disconnected from like what that money means. Like I can imagine that folks who are in that position are like, oh, what? I would be.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, my job was picking stocks, right? And so my job was to pick stocks and make recommendations. And so when you're presenting your stock idea to, you know, 5 or 10 people who have been in this business for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, that imposter syndrome is going to rage, because you're like, why am I telling this portfolio manager who has 25 years of experience what stock they should buy? It's like, who am I? But that's not the point. The point is you're giving a different perspective. And that's the other thing. It's like, you may not have that knowledge, but you have a different perspective than they do. And you might see something that they don't. And so that was always the thing that I was reminded of by my manager. It's like, look, Anita, like, you're new at this, but that's a good thing, right? It's good because you're coming at from a different angle that someone else might not have thought of. So just remembering that your skill set might be different than the other person who's doing what you do, and that might be adding some value.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So thinking about your own kind of journey, there been any particular influences that have kind of guided you in the direction that you're in, you know, be it mentors, books, like, has there been anything really notable that you want to kind of call out and say, this changed my life and it might change yours too?
So the people who have really encouraged me to keep doing what I'm doing are the people in the financial industry who are not afraid to have an opinion. So these are people who are going to take a stand, and they're going to have an opinion, and they're going to go up there and they're going to say it. So that it might be often through YouTube videos. And I know there's lots of stuff on YouTube that you shouldn't really be, you know, trusting or believing in, but there are some people up there who are super smart, who use data and facts to back up their arguments. And specifically, I'll give, you know, for example, it's like, there's just one gentleman named Ben Felix who likes to kind of dispel some of the investment products that are out there. And I have so much respect for him, because these are products that are being sold by financial institutions to clients as if like this is the best thing that was ever invented. And he's like, wait a minute, it's not. And here's why. And he gets a lot of flack and feedback for it, but he's totally right. And he is not going to back down. He's going to continue to tell the truth. And so for me, those sorts of people who are brave enough to have a strong opinion and to say it and to back it up with facts, that's been really motivating for me, because when you work for a large corporation, especially in banking, there's not a lot of room to have opinions outside of your team, right? And so anything that's client facing, so I used to do writing for, you know, the website or whatever, and it would go through 2 compliance people and 2 legal people and all these changes and edits. And by the time it's published, it's like, it's so watered down, it's like barely useful. And so leaving that environment and being able to have a voice and an opinion and not being afraid to say that opinion has been so motivating to me. Not that I'm not one who will like kick up a storm by saying something super controversial, because that's not my objective. But when I started writing my blog 4 years ago, that freedom to write what I want and not worry about everything being so exactly politically correct or applying to every single person's situation and naming the 43 risks that might apply, like being free of all that was super amazing. And so I really try, when I write my blog piece, or I also write some articles for the Globe and Mail, like trying to have an opinion. And it's not always popular. And I know that. And I read that in the comments, it's not always popular, but I feel like it's important for someone to have a voice and to contribute to the conversation, right? If no independent people are contributing to the conversation, whether it's about money or anything else, like how are we ever going to develop better policies or get people in better positions or whatever? And so for me, it's those folks who are, I admire them so much. There's another gentleman, his name is Ed Rempel. He's a financial planner with tons of experience. And he will also put up these videos that are counter to what the common advice would be. And I admire that. And most of the time I agree with him, and he's not afraid to put his opinions out there.
Yeah, that's, kind of talking about the Globe and Mail. That's one of the things that I really admired about Rob Carrick over his 35 years writing for the Globe and Mail and kind of that personal finance column sort of thing. Like he, a lot of the time said, this thing that everybody thinks is a thing, maybe not. And that brings up another kind of interesting topic, is like misinformation. we think of misinformation a lot of the time through the lens of like politics, because that's just the world that we're in right now. But I'm sure that there is a lot of really misinformation, even disinformation adjacent stuff that happens in the financial world. Like how, and I'm sure that you see quite a bit of it, like misinformation. Your clients come to you and they say, someone told me about like a thing X, and they say it's the best thing since sliced bread. It's going to make me like into a trillionaire overnight. I'm sure you see a lot of that. How do you approach those conversations? Because I'm sure that those people in those situations, they're coming to you and they have at least partly a baked in belief that's emotional, and countering emotion can be challenging. Like, how do you see that, and how do you go about that if you do?
Most commonly, I see it with investments. So people will come to me and they say, oh, my neighbor told me about this private mortgage investment and he's getting X% guaranteed return. And people get lulled into this. And it's often a friend, a neighbor, someone on their hockey team, like they're getting this information from them. Sometimes it's from YouTube or Instagram or TikTok or whatever, but a lot of times it's a friend that they trust and that they feel like they can trust. And so I'm always very gentle, but I'm very firm. And it's basically like, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. If it sounds like a fancy investment product, it's probably not a good idea. If it's someone selling it to you like it's unique or it's special or it's only offered to you or you have to be special to get in on this, these are all red flags that are like, stay away, because people don't need those fancy products. All they need are the basics. They just need basic ETFs and just be boring and invest that way. And I find that people are really receptive to that because it comes back to the fact that I'm independent. I have no motive for telling them they should buy something or not buy something. They know, like I say to them, like, it doesn't matter to me if you buy it. I'm just saying, like, this is my opinion. This is what I think is best for you. And here are the reasons. Of course, you can't just say you shouldn't buy this thing. It's like, here are the risks. Here are the things that I've seen happen with some of these investment products. And people are very thankful, actually, for that advice. Now, do they always follow my advice? No. Sometimes they still go ahead with that investment. And of course, that's fine. That's their choice. But I feel like it's really important to at least educate them and tell them what the risks are associated with that. And importantly, what's the alternative? Like, what else would you do to kind of earn that return?
Yeah. The advice where if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true, or at the very least, it's too good to be true the way that you think it is pretty good advice. Like, there are very few, if any, get rich quick schemes out there, unless you have all of the wealth and can corner all of the markets and can do everything. So critical thinking is kind of important to folks. Like, it sounds too good to be true. It probably is. Let's talk about your business. So give folks, the elevator pitch on why they would choose Clarity Personal Finance, what you have to offer, and most importantly, how do folks get in touch with you? I read your blog. It's great. So folks at home, like, sign up for Anita's blog. I'll put the link in the show notes, but tell us about your business.
Well, as I said earlier, there's two parts to my business. I have this traditional financial planning. And so on that side, I offer what I call my financial roadmap. So the financial roadmap is targeted to people who are sort of between 20 and 50. That's kind of the age range. And again, now I do have another niche. I tend to work with those kind of 20 to 50-year-olds. And a financial roadmap is kind of a comprehensive overview. So we're going to look at your cash flow, how much you have available to save, how much you're spending. We're going to look at your goals, whether that's retirement, paying for kids' education. It could be saving up for a big vacation, buying a new car, whatever the thing is. And then we develop a savings plan to say, well, how much do you need to be setting aside to reach those goals? And so we lay all that on paper. We talk about which accounts you should be using. And then, yes, we talk about your investments. And the idea behind the financial roadmap is you end up with a document that outlines for you on a very personalized basis what you should be doing, what steps you should be taking. And the idea is that you have a plan, you put it in place. You don't have to think about it all the time. You can put that off your mind because you know you're doing the right things and you move on with the rest of your life and basically stop using so much brain space wondering whether you're doing the right thing and what you should be doing. So that's the financial roadmap. The other part of the business is more investment coaching. And so there's a couple of things I offer there. One is this one-on-one coaching that we talked about. So this could be for someone who's already a do-it-yourself investor who just needs a second set of eyes or a sounding board. I have some thoughts, ideas. What do you think? Can you look at my portfolio? Do you see any big red flags? Then there's the people who want to become DIY investors. So it's like, okay, how do I do that? Sometimes people just want me to look at their portfolio for them. So maybe they're working with a financial advisor and they just want a second opinion, a totally unbiased opinion. So I'll do a portfolio review, explain to them, this is what you own, this is how it's performed, this is your diversification, here's what you're paying in fees, giving them all of that information. So then they can either go back to their financial advisor with some talking points to ask them questions, or maybe there's changes they want to make, or they might realize, hey, actually, I'm not really happy with the outcome of this review. I'm going to go find someone else, or I'm going to do it myself. So those are really the two parts of my business. You can find me on my website. It's clarityonyourmoney.com. My website has all the information about packages, the cost, everything. I make everything very transparent. And then as you mentioned, I do have the blog. So my blog has, 80 something posts I've been writing for the past 4 years. You can sign up for my newsletter, which goes out usually about once a month, depending how busy I am. I have a lot of other resources on my website. So if you're just looking for somewhere to go to have some good links to videos that I recommend, reading primers that I've written, there's a lot of stuff on my website that's totally free for everyone. Because again, my goal is to help people with their money.
Yeah, and I can personally attest that it's well worth the time that you will invest in reading that blog. It's great. Anita, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today. And like I mentioned, folks, I'm going to put links in the show notes to all of the interesting stuff, so you can find Anita. If you want to connect with her, you know what to do. This has been another episode of The Journey in Conversation with Anita Bruinsma. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for tuning in to The Journey in Conversation. If you liked this episode, follow or subscribe so you don't miss the next one. More builders, more breakthroughs, coming soon.